The silverware gleamed like mirrors in the candlelight, each reflection trembling with the weight of what was about to unfold. Outside, the cicadas screamed into the humid Louisiana night, as if they already knew what was coming. A single dinner, 12 guests, one girl whose silence had been mistaken for obedience. The year was 1842, in a parlor so polished you could see your sins in the floorboards. The Langford Plantation, 3 miles outside of St. Francisville, was known for two things: its prized sugar crop and its mistress, Eleanor Langford, whose charm at church socials hid a cruelty sharp enough to draw blood without a blade. Tonight, she was hosting a dinner meant to dazzle her husband's business partners. Instead, it would end with screams so terrible that neighbors claimed they echoed downriver for days. But we'll get there. First, the kitchen. The scent of roasted duck and sugared peaches drifted through the open door, mingling with the acrid sting of vinegar and heat. Iron pots hissed, bread cracked as it cooled, and in the center of it all stood Mariah, 17 years old, bare feet scuffed from long days on the kitchen stone. Her mother had once worked this same hearth before being sold west 2 summers earlier. Since then, Mariah had learned the same lesson every enslaved woman on the Langford estate knew. Silence was safer than breath. That night, Mistress Eleanor had summoned her personally. "You'll serve," she said. Not the butler, not the footman, Mariah, the girl whose face reminded Eleanor too much of her husband's late-night indiscretions. Jealousy disguised as hospitality, punishment disguised as service. The dinner bell rang at 7:30. The guests arrived dressed in linen and arrogance, their laughter bright and hollow. Crystal decanters caught the light. Behind the swinging kitchen door, Mariah poured the wine, dark, shimmering red that clung to the glass like guilt. She'd been watching Mistress Eleanor for months, studying how she liked her cup filled, how she liked her guests entertained, how she liked everyone beneath her thumb. She'd also been watching something else. In a cracked cabinet near the floor, hidden behind sacks of flour, sat a tin labeled for rats only. Its powder, white as sugar, had been there for years. Nobody asked where it came from or how much was left. No one noticed that the lid didn't quite seal anymore. Tick of the clock, clink of glass, heat rising off the stove like breath from the devil's mouth. Mariah lifted the tin. Her hands didn't shake. She wasn't planning murder, not in words, not in thought. But something in her had already crossed a line that couldn't be walked back. What would you do, the story asks, if your whole life was an open wound, and the person who caused it smiled at you from the head of the table? 8 o'clock. The dining room glittered. Eleanor's laughter rang out, brittle and sweet. Mariah moved like smoke between the guests, her eyes never rising, her hands steady as she filled each glass. "More wine for Mr. Harlan," Eleanor instructed, her voice syruped with malice. "Yes, ma'am," Mariah whispered. The cork squeaked, the liquid shimmered. She poured from the decanter, the one Eleanor had insisted she use for special occasions. Inside, invisible and silent, the powder swirled. But it wasn't vengeance yet. Not until Eleanor leaned toward her husband, brushing his sleeve like claiming territory, whispering something that made the table roar with laughter. The sound cracked something open inside Mariah, a sound like a rope pulled too tight. That was the moment she decided. The first sip was taken at 8:15, a toast, to fortune, to family, to sugar that would sweeten the empire. "To the Langfords," they said. To everything that was wrong in the world, thought Mariah. The night slowed, The candles guttered low. Someone complained of a taste, a little bitter, but Eleanor waved it off with a smile. By 8:27, Mr. Harlan dropped his fork. His hand trembled, then stiffened. A cough raked his chest, deep and wet. Another guest stood, asking if he was all right. He wasn't. The laughter died first. Then came the sound of shattering crystal. Eleanor's eyes darted toward the kitchen. "Mariah!" she barked, the name slicing through the air. But the girl wasn't there. The kitchen door swung softly, still warm from her passing. The scent of almonds hung faintly in the air. Blood in the wine. A minute later, chaos. Chairs overturned, silver clattered against the floor. The plantation's grand chandelier trembled with every scream. And from the back hall, someone heard soft footsteps descending toward the servants' quarters. Slow, deliberate, unhurried. In the records kept at St. Francisville Courthouse, there's an entry dated August 19th, 1842. 12 persons taken ill following a supper at Langford Estate. Mistress survived. Cause unknown. Unknown to them, but not to us. The house would never sound the same again. The walls remember. Before we go deeper into that night and what drove a young girl to turn her silence into a weapon, tell me, where are you watching from right now? What time is it where you are? Drop a comment below, and if stories like this keep you up at night, hit that like button and subscribe, because what happens next will change how you see every Southern dinner ever served. The first body hadn't even cooled when Eleanor realized something worse than poison was in her house. It was the truth. And the truth was coming for her. By the time the doctor's buggy rattled up the drive, the night had curdled into silence. The dining room doors were closed, though the smell inside seeped through. The sharp mix of wine, sweat, and something metallic that didn't belong at a dinner table. Lanterns flickered in the hall, throwing long, nervous shadows across, the portraits of ancestors who looked on in disapproval. Eleanor Langford sat alone at the head of the table, her gown torn at the shoulder, her curls plastered to her temples with sweat. 11 guests had collapsed around her, their faces slack, their lips stained red. The 12th, her husband Thomas, lay at her feet, eyes open, fixed on nothing. He'd called her name before he fell. She hadn't answered. The doctor stepped inside, handkerchief pressed to his face. "What happened here?" he demanded. Eleanor's voice came out hoarse. "The wine. Something in the wine." He examined a glass, sniffed it, then poured a small sample into a vial. "Arsenic," he muttered after a moment. "Or something worse." Outside, the plantation stirred with murmurs. Servants whispered in the shadows. The field hands clustered near the kitchen doorway. Everyone knew what Eleanor refused to admit, that someone in her own house had done this. And one name passed through their lips, like a prayer and a curse. Mariah. The girl who vanished between one heartbeat and the next. That name would echo through Adams Parish for decades. But first came the questions. Eleanor insisted on control even as the world beneath her cracked. She ordered the bodies moved, the carpets cleaned, the silver polished. When the doctor suggested notifying the sheriff, she lifted her chin. "No one outside this house will hear of this tonight," she said. "Do you understand me?" He didn't argue, not because he agreed, but because the look in her eyes was something he didn't want following him home. The kitchen reeked of vinegar and ash. Mariah's apron still hung on its peg, neatly folded. On the counter sat an empty decanter, its rim sticky with residue. Near it, a small porcelain bowl that had once held sugar, but now was dusted with white powder. "Poison doesn't mix itself," the doctor said quietly. Eleanor turned away. "Find her." Outside, the night pressed heavy on the fields. Crickets had fallen silent. Somewhere near the tree line, a dog barked once and stopped. The overseer, a man named Griffin, gathered 2 of his men and set off with lanterns, calling the girl's name into the dark. They didn't find her. What they did find was a set of footprints, bare, small, leading toward the cypress swamp that bordered the plantation. After that, nothing but mud and moonlight. The swamp keeps its secrets. By morning, rumors had begun to spread. Some said Mariah had drowned. Others swore they saw her walking along the riverbank, her dress white as bone. Eleanor refused to sleep. She wandered the halls, replaying the dinner in her mind. The way Mariah had stood behind her chair, eyes lowered. The way Thomas had smiled at the girl, too warmly, too long. That smile haunted her now. She went to the mirror above the mantel, the one framed in carved magnolia wood. Her reflection looked older, almost foreign. A crack ran through the glass, splitting her face in, too. "You see what she's done?" she whispered to no one. "She's taken everything." But mirrors don't answer. They only reflect what you already know. At 9 o'clock that morning, Sheriff Benjamin Tate arrived from St. Francisville with a deputy and a notebook. He'd been roused from bed by a trembling field boy who'd run barefoot for miles to summon him. "Mrs. Langford," he said with stiff politeness, "I need your account of last night's events." She told him what she could remember: the meal, the laughter, the first signs of illness. She omitted the jealousy, the cruelty, the months of humiliation that had led to this night. When he asked about Mariah, she hesitated. "A kitchen girl," she said finally. "Unremarkable. Unremarkable girls don't vanish after a massacre." That word, massacre, made her flinch. He inspected the dining room, scribbling notes. "All your guests drank the same wine?" "Yes." "And only you survived?" Her silence was answer enough. He crouched by Thomas's body. "Strange," he murmured. "He looks peaceful." Eleanor's eyes flicked toward the glass still clutched in her husband's hand. "He always did when he got his way." The sheriff closed his notebook. "We'll find the girl," he said, "alive or dead." But even he didn't sound sure. Outside, the heat thickened. Workers moved quietly across the yard, cleaning blood from the veranda steps. In the distance, the sound of hammers, the overseer boarding up the kitchen windows as if sealing away a curse. By mid-afternoon, the first flies arrived. That evening, Eleanor ordered the table reset exactly as it had been. The same china, the same folded napkins, the same crystal goblets. She sat alone, staring at the empty chairs. Every creak of the floor made her turn. Every whisper of wind sounded like a girl's voice. It was guilt or madness, maybe both. From the diary of Cook Ellen Wade, August 20th, 1842. Mistress spoke to her reflection again tonight. Said she saw Mariah in the glass. "I keep my eyes down. I keep my mouth shut. The kitchen still smells like almonds." Silence has a flavor. It tastes like fear. A week passed. The newspapers called it the Langford Supper tragedy. They printed Eleanor's name, but not Mariah's, describing her only as a servant girl of uncertain parentage. No charges were filed. No body was found. Still, the sheriff returned every few days, asking new questions. "Was there trouble between you and your husband? Between you and the girl?" Eleanor deflected. She spoke of duty, decorum, God's will. But at night, alone in her room, she whispered to the empty air. She wanted to be seen. I made her visible. The more she tried to contain the story, the larger it grew. At the local market, women whispered that Eleanor had gone mad, that she'd poisoned her guests herself to frame the girl. At church, the pews around her sat empty. Even the pastor's sermon about the wages of sin seemed aimed directly at her pew. She began keeping the shutters closed. Light felt intrusive, accusatory. Then came the scratching. It started softly from the walls near the dining room, like fingernails tracing wood. The servants heard it too. They swore it came from inside the walls, from behind the mirror. When the sound stopped, the house felt colder. And that night, Eleanor dreamed she was back at the table, wine glass in hand, laughter rising, and across from her sat Mariah, smiling. The dream tasted of copper. She woke screaming. What no one knew was that Mariah had left something behind, something more dangerous than poison. In the ashes of the kitchen hearth, beneath the scorched wood, the doctor later found a folded scrap of paper. The ink had bled, but a few words remained legible. Some meals serve themselves. He didn't tell Eleanor. He didn't tell anyone, because by then, the story had already begun to spread beyond the plantation. Travelers claimed the Langford house was cursed. A merchant passing by at dusk said he saw a girl's shadow in the upstairs window, though the house was locked and empty, and the river kept whispering a single name: Mariah. The sheriff would return one final time before the end of summer, with news that turned tragedy into legend and guilt into something far darker. Because one of the guests hadn't stayed dead, and she had a story to tell. The house was not done yet. Rain hammered the Langford plantation roof the night the body moved. It was a storm that rolled in without warning. Wind shaking the shutters. Thunder splintering the silence that had hung since the supper. The servants had taken to sleeping in the stables, afraid of the dining hall, where 11 coffins now waited for burial. Eleanor Langford refused to leave the house. "This is my home," she said to no one in particular. "The dead don't scare me. The living do." At 2:20 in the morning, cook Ellen Wade, unable to sleep, heard something from the parlor, a sound that didn't belong to the storm, a scraping, slow, repetitive. When she dared to open the door, lightning illuminated the dining room. The coffins lined up neatly as they had for days, but one, third from the end, had its lid shifted slightly askew. Ellen screamed. By sunrise, the sheriff was back, coat-soaked, hat dripping river water. "Tell me exactly what you saw," he said. "The lid was open," Ellen whispered, "just enough to see his hand." Sheriff Tate pried it open himself. Inside, Mr. Alden Carraway, the banker from Baton Rouge, lay pale as candle wax. His throat bore red welts, as if he'd clawed at himself in his last moments. But there was something else. His mouth was open. Inside, the tip of his tongue had been bitten clean through. The doctor frowned. "That wasn't like this when I sealed the body," he said quietly. The sheriff stared at him. "Are you suggesting he woke up?" "I'm saying he wasn't dead when we thought he was." The servants crossed themselves. Eleanor said nothing, just turned away and poured herself a drink. Her hand trembled only slightly. The storm hadn't stopped. Water ran down the windows in crooked veins. Outside, the yard had turned to mud. The cypress trees leaned under the weight of the wind. Somewhere beyond the fence line, a branch snapped with a sound like bone. Sheriff Tate set his glass down. "We'll have to dig up the others," he said. "If one was misdiagnosed, Eleanor cut him off. "No, you'll do no such thing." He hesitated. "Ma'am, this may be a matter of safety." "Or of shame," she said sharply. "I won't have this plantation turned into a circus for ghouls and gossip." The sheriff leaned closer. "With respect, Mrs. Langford, that circus already started the moment your guests started dying." In the corner of the room, the fire popped. It smelled faintly of wet wood and something sweeter, like roasted almonds. The doctor noticed it too. "What's burning?" he asked. Eleanor turned toward the hearth. "Nothing," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. When the sheriff left that afternoon, he took the unearthed vial from the dining table, a small glass bottle half filled with cloudy residue. It was the same one he'd seen in the kitchen after the poisonings. He meant to send it to Baton Rouge for testing, but the roads flooded that night. The bottle never left his satchel. It shattered 3 days later when his horse spooked crossing the bridge. The sheriff barely survived the fall. His deputy claimed he saw the river turn white around the wreckage before sweeping it downstream. Some rivers keep their witnesses quiet. Meanwhile, Eleanor's health began to unravel. Her hands shook. She slept only in fragments. The servants whispered that she'd stopped eating, though Cook Ellen swore she saw her sipping wine every night, alone, in front of the empty table. On August 29th, a week after the storm, a letter arrived from Baton Rouge. The coroner who'd assisted with the first investigation had examined residue from the decanter the doctor had sent him. His findings were brief and horrifying. Compound detected: arsenic trioxide, rat poison commonly available. However, traces suggest addition of another element, aconite, derived from wolfsbane, causes temporary paralysis preceding cardiac failure. Victims may appear dead before breathing ceases fully. The letter arrived at dawn. By noon, the rumor had reached the fields. The guests hadn't just died. Some had been buried alive. When Eleanor heard, she locked herself in her room for 2 days. She burned the bed sheets, the drapes, even her husband's clothes. "Clean," she whispered as she fed the flames. "It must be clean." On the 3rd day, she emerged barefoot, eyes glassy. "We'll hold the burials tonight," she said. "No coffins. Fire will do." The servants exchanged glances. The doctor tried to reason with her. "You'll frighten the workers, ma'am." "They're already frightened," she replied. "Let them see the end of it." That night, under a swollen moon, 11 bodies were brought to the yard behind the barn. Logs were stacked, kerosene poured. Eleanor stood beside the pyre in a black gown that made her skin look ghostly. The fire crackled, smoke twisting toward the stars. As flames consumed the first coffin, the air filled with a sound, a low moan that made every head turn. It came from the far end of the pile. One of the bodies had begun to move. Eleanor froze. The doctor lunged forward, shouting for water, but the fire was too strong. The wood collapsed inward, and whatever had stirred was lost to the flames. Later, when he confronted her, the doctor's voice was hoarse. "That man was alive." Eleanor's eyes were wild. "Then he's free now," she said. Her words chilled him more than the fire ever could. From the personal ledger of Sheriff Benjamin Tate, September 2nd, 1842. Returned to Langford Estate. House reeks of smoke and fear. Mistress unwell. Claims voices in the walls. Servants leaving nightly. Filed report to Baton Rouge, but suspect it will vanish like the last one. The Langford estate was unraveling. The sugar fields lay untended, the house half empty. And through it all, Eleanor began to see her reflection differently. In the hall mirrors, her face blurred, replaced sometimes by another, darker, younger, eyes burning. Mariah. She wants what's hers, Eleanor whispered to the empty room. And I owe her nothing. But guilt doesn't need permission to collect. One evening, Ellen the cook found her mistress at the mirror again, touching the glass as if it were warm. You can't have it, Eleanor murmured. You'll never have it. When Ellen asked who she was speaking to, Eleanor only smiled. 2 nights later, the mirror cracked again, this time without cause. No one slept. The house groaned with unseen weight. Doors swung open on their own. The smell of almonds returned, faint but persistent. By mid-September, the sheriff's replacement, Deputy Carter, arrived with orders to close the case. No suspects, no arrests, he said. Baton Rouge wants this forgotten. Eleanor didn't protest. She simply asked if they'd found Mariah's body. Not yet, Carter replied. But we will. She smiled faintly. No, she said. You won't. That night, a maid saw her mistress walking barefoot through the rain toward the cypress swamp, whispering to someone unseen. When called, Eleanor didn't answer. The maid swore she heard another voice respond, a young woman's voice, soft and clear, saying, "It's your turn to serve." By dawn, Eleanor was gone. Only her shoes were found, neatly placed at the swamp's edge beside a broken mirror frame. In town, the preacher called it suicide. The neighbors called it justice. The servants called it something else entirely. They called it returning the favor. Weeks later, fishermen reported seeing a pale figure wading through the reeds at twilight, carrying a silver tray. When asked who she was serving, they said she smiled and pointed back toward the river. The sheriff never verified those stories, but he stopped fishing after dark. Because deep down, he believed what everyone else did. The mistress and the servant had finally switched places, and somewhere under that black water, the dinner was still being served. The river keeps feeding itself. The cypress swamp behind the Langford Plantation wasn't mapped on paper. It moved with the seasons, swallowing paths one year and giving them back the next. Locals said it had a temper, that it remembered every secret whispered into its water. When Eleanor disappeared there, no one doubted it had taken her on purpose. 3 days later, Sheriff Tate's replacement, Deputy Carter, led a search party through the bog. The sun had already gone pale behind the moss. The air was thick with mosquitoes and the smell of decay, mud, stagnant water, and something sweeter beneath it, like spoiled honey. Each step made the ground breathe, bubbles rising and bursting with soft sighs. They found the shoes first, then the footprints. Bare, delicate, not Eleanor's size, smaller. She wasn't alone, said Carter quietly. The men glanced at one another but didn't speak. At the water's edge, a shape caught the light. White fabric tangled in reeds. A dress, torn, soaked, unrecognizable except for the embroidery at the hem. A magnolia stitched in silver thread. Eleanor's, but it wasn't her body lying beside it. It was Ellen Wade, the cook. Her face was turned toward the sky, mouth open in an eternal gasp. The doctor bent over her, fingers trembling. No sign of struggle, he murmured. No bruises, no rope, just stopped. The deputy frowned. Stopped? Like her heart forgot to beat. From his journal that evening, Deputy Carter recorded, "Third death connected to Langford Supper. House abandoned. Swamp reclaimed back gardens. Locals refuse to enter after sundown. They say they hear a woman singing among the trees." The singing began that night. It came low at first, like a lullaby half remembered. Then it rose, soft, wordless, carried on the fog that drifted over the riverbanks. Some swore it was Maria calling the dead. Others said it was Eleanor, begging forgiveness from something that wouldn't answer. By the second week of October, the Langford plantation stood empty. The fields lay fallow. The grand house sagged with moisture, wallpaper peeling like old skin. Carter was ordered to close the file. Baton Rouge wanted the story buried deeper than the bodies. But stories like that don't stay quiet, because 2 counties away, another dinner was about to begin. In West Feliciana Parish. At the Waverly estate, the smell of roast quail and lemon cake filled the air. Mr. and Mrs. Wardle were hosting a party. Guests from New Orleans, a banker from Mobile, and the new reverend in town. The cook was new too, a quiet woman who'd arrived 2 weeks earlier asking for work. She went by Mary. She was small, polite, and never met anyone's eyes. Her hands bore faint scars like old burns. The housemaid said she hummed while she cooked, melodies that weren't hymns but sounded like them. That night, as laughter rose from the dining room, Mary poured wine into crystal goblets, the same deep red shade that had once filled the Langford glasses. "Smells lovely," said Mrs. Wardle. Mary smiled faintly. "It always does, ma'am." When the clock struck 8, thunder rumbled in the distance. Guests toasted to prosperity, to God, to the sweetness of the South. At 8:15, the Reverend coughed. By 8:22, the laughter had turned to confusion. "Are you unwell?" Mrs. Wardle asked her husband. He opened his mouth to answer and collapsed face first into the lemon cake. The screaming started. Mary didn't stay to hear it end. 2 days later, Carter received the telegraph. Another supper, similar symptoms, no survivors, cook missing. He didn't need to read it twice. Maria had been gone for nearly 2 months. Dead, they said, or drowned, or worse. But Carter knew now she hadn't vanished at all. She'd moved. "She's not haunting," he muttered. "She's continuing." When he rode to the Waverly estate, the smell hit him before he reached the house. Not decay, something else. A floral sweetness that seemed to cling to his clothes. He found the dining room still untouched, flies buzzing over half-eaten plates. In one corner, etched into the soot-blackened hearth, were 4 words written in ash: "Still serving the living." The handwriting was small, careful, feminine. The coroner counted 12 bodies again. Carter's hand shook as he made his notes. The pattern was too precise to ignore. 12 at Langford, 12 at Waverly. Same time of night. Same mixture of arsenic and aconite. The press got hold of it anyway. Headlines called her the Southern Poisoner, the ghost cook of the Delta, and worse. But the black community whispered another name: the Deliverer. That winter, riverboats heading north reported strange cargo, women traveling alone carrying forged papers, all using the same last name: Langford. Some said they'd been freed by the courts. Others said they just walked away while no one was looking. Each one carried a small vial on a string around her neck. Carter began to suspect something bigger than revenge, a message spreading across plantations like wildfire, quiet and invisible. A rebellion that didn't need guns, only patience. He traced shipments of rat poison from New Orleans to Natchez. Every time one disappeared from inventory. A white family somewhere hosted a dinner that ended in tragedy. And always, in the kitchen, a woman no one remembered hiring. At first he thought they were imitators, slaves or freed women copying Mariah's story. But the reports blurred over time. Ages changed, faces changed, names changed. Only the eyes stayed the same. Deep, dark, watchful. One night in December, Carter sat in his office reviewing witness statements when he heard a knock at the door. A girl stood there in a travel cloak soaked through with rain. "You the lawman?" she asked. He nodded. "You lost?" "No, sir," she said, pulling something from her pocket. A folded piece of paper, damp but legible. He unfolded it. Inside were 12 names. The Langfords, the Wardles, and 10 others he hadn't seen before. At the bottom, a line in the same handwriting as before. Until the balance is kept. When he looked up, the doorway was empty. Only rain. Back at the swamp, locals still heard the singing. Sometimes it was 2 voices, sometimes 1. The water glowed faintly under the moon, rippling without wind. Fishermen claimed they saw lights moving under the surface, like lanterns carried by invisible hands. A few even said they'd seen the women, one in a torn black dress, the other barefoot, holding a tray of silver cups. Each time the witnesses swore the same thing. The faces looked different, but the eyes never changed. In early January, Carter returned to the abandoned Langford house. He'd meant to seal it up for good, but curiosity gnawed at him. Inside, dust coated everything. A single chair sat before the broken mirror. On the glass, drawn in soot, were new words, written by a steady hand. "Every meal remembers." Carter stared at it until the firelight dimmed. Outside, frogs croaked. Wind rattled the shutters. He left the house before sunrise, certain of 2 things. The swamp would never give back what it took, and somewhere, another table was being set. Because vengeance, like hunger, always comes back for seconds. The swamp doesn't forget. Sheriff Benjamin Tate retired before the frost came that winter, leaving behind a box of files he refused to discuss. Deputy Carter inherited both the badge and the ghosts. The box sat on his desk, tied with frayed twine, smelling faintly of tobacco and mildew. Inside were maps of plantations across Louisiana and Mississippi, each marked with tiny X's drawn in black ink. 12 X's at Langford, 12 more at Waverly, 6 others scattered along the river like stepping stones. Carter stared at the pattern until dawn. It wasn't random. The dots curved northeast, following the same route used by those escaping north through the Underground Railroad. The realization chilled him. Someone wasn't just killing out of vengeance. They were moving, traveling, leaving a trail of emptied houses behind. He lit a cigarette and studied the names of the estates, beside the X's: Calhoun, Greenbrier, Harper's Grove. Families he knew, all known for their cruelty, all boasting fine meals and fine reputations. Until the balance is kept. That phrase from the note haunted him. By February, word of the Supper murders had spread to every parlor in the South. Newspapers called them plagues of the devil. Ministers preached that the poisoner was an omen of judgment. Women whispered of cursed kitchens, of servants who smiled too softly. Fear became its own contagion. Plantation wives began dismissing their cooks, choosing instead to fast, to live on biscuits and tea brewed only by their own trembling hands. And in the empty kitchens left behind, notes began appearing, charred corners, careful script. For every hunger, a reckoning. In March, Carter received a visitor. She arrived by steamboat, wearing mourning black, though no one had died that week. At least, not publicly. She introduced herself as Miss Hester Lyle, an investigator from New Orleans hired by the governor to ensure public order. Her accent was crisp, her gloves spotless. "I hear you're the only man still asking questions," she said, seating herself without invitation. "Depends who's doing the asking," Carter replied. She smiled thinly. I study patterns, poison especially. Women who use it, men who fear it. You have quite the outbreak here. He slid the map toward her. Then tell me what this looks like. She traced the X's with one gloved finger. A pilgrimage, she said finally. Or a lesson. A lesson in what? Patience, she said. And mathematics. Her eyes lifted. Do you know what aconite costs at the apothecary in Baton Rouge? Carter shook his head. 6 cents an ounce, she said. Rat poison, 2 cents, both legal, both in every household in the South. It would take months, years even, to collect enough to kill this many people. Whoever's doing this isn't improvising, she's planning. She? He echoed. Miss Lyle smiled. All poisoners are women, Sheriff. Men shoot for glory. Women serve revenge. That night, Carter couldn't sleep. He kept seeing the swamp reflected in the mirror above his desk, though the nearest window faced away from it. The frogs croaked outside, but underneath their rhythm, he thought he heard another sound. Soft footsteps pacing the hall. When he finally rose to investigate, the hallway was empty except for a folded piece of linen lying on the floor. It was an apron, white, immaculate. Across the hem, embroidered magnolias glowed faintly in the lantern light. He didn't touch it. Instead, he poured himself whiskey and went back to the map. Miss Lyle was right. The pattern wasn't random. Each site was connected by trade routes. The same merchants who sold sugar, salt, and fine linens also sold poison under harmless names. Rat's bane, tonic of sleep, domestic purifier. And at every stop, a girl called Mary or Sarah or Ellen appeared briefly in the records, then vanished before the next killing. Too deliberate to be coincidence, too human to be ghost. April brought the thaw and another dinner. This one took place in Mississippi, at a small estate called Greenbrier. The host, Mr. Alton Price, was known for 2 things: his temper and his fondness for imported French wine. The dinner began at 7:45. By 8:20, his guests were writhing on the floor, and the new kitchen girl was gone. The next morning, a letter arrived on Carter's desk. You map their wealth. I map their sins. Balance is patient. It wasn't signed, but the handwriting was identical to the earlier note. Carter showed it to Miss Lyle. If she's writing to me, he said, why not turn herself in? Miss Lyle folded the paper carefully. Because you're the only man she trusts to understand her work. Her work? He nearly laughed. She's killing people. She's unmaking a system, Lyle said quietly. That's older than either of us. In the evenings, Carter began walking the riverbank where Eleanor Langford had vanished. The air smelled of mud and decay, but also of jasmine, the same flower that once scented her dinner hall. Sometimes he thought he saw shapes moving in the mist. Women carrying baskets, a figure standing waist-deep in the water, watching him. He told himself it was exhaustion. Until one night, he found footprints in the silt, bare, small, and fresh. He followed them until they ended at a half-submerged tree trunk. Something glinted there, half buried in moss. A silver spoon, engraved with the Langford crest. When he picked it up, he noticed a thin residue on the bowl, white powder that tingled against his skin. He dropped it immediately. From Miss Lyle's field notes, April 12, 1843. Carter grows restless, obsessed with the girl as if she were apparition and not architect. I've seen the pattern now. Every estate targeted belongs to a family once tied to the Langfords through marriage or trade. She's dismantling a lineage, line by line, name by name. I begin to wonder whether vengeance can pass from one woman to another, like a recipe shared in whispers. On April 27th, the governor ordered the investigation shut down. Public panic threatened commerce. Planters refused to host guests. Some burned their kitchens entirely. "This hysteria must end," the governor wrote. "No more chasing ghosts." But Carter couldn't let it go. He and Miss Lyle met one final time at a riverside tavern. The rain fell steady, drumming against the roof like a heartbeat. "She'll stop when she's done," Miss Lyle said. "And when is that?" "When she finds the last name on her list." Carter looked down at the map. Only one X remained unchecked. The name beside it made his throat tighten. Calhoun Estate. He knew it well. It belonged to his uncle. That night, he saddled his horse and rode through the storm. Every mile north felt heavier. He arrived just past midnight to find the manor alive with laughter and candlelight. His uncle was hosting a dinner, 12 guests seated around the table. And there, moving silently between them with a tray of wine, was a girl. Small, barefoot, eyes lowered. He called out, "Stop!" The laughter faltered. The girl froze. Every face turned toward him. "Don't drink," he said, voice cracking. "For God's sake, don't—" But it was too late. The first glass touched the first pair of lips, and the clock on the mantel struck 8:20. Carter remembered only fragments afterward. The guests collapsing, his uncle gasping for air, the girl's bare feet flashing down the corridor. He chased her into the courtyard, where rain turned the earth to mirrors. She looked back once, her face half-shadowed, her expression unreadable. "Why?" he shouted. Her voice was soft, almost kind. "Because someone had to serve them what they made us swallow." Then she stepped backward into the rain, vanishing as if the night itself had taken her in. By dawn, the Calhoun house stood silent. Carter stared at his reflection in the silver tray she'd left behind. His own eyes looked darker than he remembered. He understood then that the story had outgrown one girl. It was a contagion of memory, passing from hand to hand, kitchen to kitchen, mirror to mirror. And once you looked long enough into the reflection, you could almost believe the river was inside you too. The hunger moves forward. The Calhoun massacre ended any pretense of order. Newspapers couldn't print fast enough. "Dinner of death," one headline screamed. "Poisoner walks the Delta." Preachers thundered from pulpits about sin and divine reckoning, while housewives hid their mirrors beneath cloth and prayed over their tea. But Deputy Carter wasn't praying. He was shaking. He'd spent the night buried in statements from survivors, if you could call them that. 2 had made it long enough to speak. Both said the same thing. They saw a woman in the hallway mirror watching them eat. She lifted her glass when they lifted theirs. She smiled when they did, but she wasn't at the table. Carter didn't report that detail to the governor. He barely wrote it down. Instead, he found himself staring at his own reflection in the polished silver tray from the scene, the one she had left behind. His face looked hollow in it, his badge gleaming like a brand. "Because someone had to serve them what they made us swallow." Her voice, quiet, unflinching, wouldn't leave his head. He buried his uncle at dawn. No clergy, no crowd, just the sound of rain hitting the coffin lid. The river swelled nearby, dark and restless, dragging branches and debris toward the gulf. He caught the faint smell of almonds again, the same bitter trace that seemed to follow every sight. Back at his office, Miss Lyle waited, her gloves folded neatly on his desk. "You saw her," she said. He hesitated. "I saw someone," Her eyes softened. And what did she look like? Different, he murmured. Older than I expected, but the same eyes. The eyes don't change, she said. That's how you know it's still her. He frowned. Still her? You think there's more than one? I think there's many. She opened her satchel and laid out a stack of sketches, faces from witness accounts, cooks, maids, traveling seamstresses, all different, yet all bearing the same expression, calm, knowing, unafraid. Carter rubbed his temples. You're telling me this is… what? Some kind of order? A network of poisoners? Miss Lyle shook her head. No, not a network. A memory. Memories travel farther than people. The first girl, Mariah, didn't die in that swamp. Even if her body did, her story didn't. It's moving through them, one kitchen at a time. He wanted to laugh, but he couldn't. Because part of him believed her. The Langford mirror had been moved to the courthouse after the investigation closed. It sat propped in a dusty storeroom, draped in canvas. One night, Carter asked the janitor to fetch it. He wanted proof, something physical. When he pulled the cloth away, he expected dust. Instead, the glass gleamed like water. For a long moment, his reflection looked normal. Then, as he leaned closer, the surface seemed to ripple, and another face looked back. Not Mariah's, not exactly, but close enough. Her lips moved though no sound came. Then, faintly, words formed on the fogging glass. You carry the last course. Carter stumbled backward. The janitor swore the air turned cold, that frost crawled up the mirror's frame though it was midsummer. By the time Carter blinked, the message was gone. Only his own pale face stared back. That night, he couldn't stop shaking. He poured whiskey, stared into his cup, and realized he could smell almonds again. From Miss Lyle's private memorandum, May 15, 1843. Carter deteriorating. Claims the reflection speaks. I've begun to suspect the contagion is psychological, a kind of moral fever passed by guilt. Yet part of me wonders if guilt alone can alter mirrors. There are reports of kitchen fires spreading upriver. Some swear they hear laughter inside. If this is madness, it's organized. Carter left town 3 days later. He rode south, following the river's bend, past flooded fields and abandoned estates. At night, he camped by the water. The frogs were silent now. The swamp had gone still. Near midnight, he heard footsteps again, bare feet on wet earth. He drew his revolver but didn't fire. You followed far enough, a voice said from the dark. She stood at the water's edge, her dress pale and clinging, hair plastered to her neck. The moon painted her skin the color of bone. Mariah, he said. She tilted her head. That's what you call me. Then what are you? Her smile was faint. A servant, still serving. He swallowed. If this is vengeance, it's done. The names are gone. The house is burned. You can stop. Her eyes met his. Stop? When the table is still set? When the same hunger still feeds itself? I've seen enough death, he said. She took a step closer. Then you've seen enough truth. Death is the only thing that listens. He felt the world tilt, the smell of almonds thick around him. What do you want from me? I want you to remember, she whispered. That's how I stay alive. And then she was gone. Just mist, just ripples on the black water. By morning, his horse was missing, his coat soaked. He walked back toward town half mad from fever and exhaustion. Miss Lyle found him collapsed at the courthouse steps. When he woke, she was reading from a letter that had arrived overnight. From Natchez, she said. Another supper. 12 more dead. The cook's name? Mary Allen. No trace. He sat up slowly. It won't stop. No, she said softly. But maybe we can redirect it. How? By telling it. That summer, she published an anonymous pamphlet. The Servant's Table, an account of Southern reckonings. It circulated quietly, banned in most cities, but passed hand to hand in markets, in churches, in quarters where whispers traveled faster than sermons. It told Mariah's story, not as a ghost, but as a warning. Not a murderer, but a mirror. Each page ended with the same line: every meal remembers. Carter never spoke publicly again. He resigned before autumn. People said he'd gone north, others that he'd drowned in the same swamp where the first girl vanished. But Miss Lyle kept his notebook. Inside the final entry, written in shaky hand, was a confession. The reflection doesn't haunt me. It waits. When I look into glass, I see her eyes, and behind them others, hundreds, maybe thousands. Every woman who ever served in silence now watching back. Sometimes when I drink, I taste almonds. In the years that followed, the supper killings faded into rumor. Reconstruction came, then new wars, new plagues. But in the kitchens of the Deep South, the legend persisted. Cooks passed down recipes with warnings. Never serve what you wouldn't eat yourself. And sometimes, when the pot boiled too long or the mirror fogged from steam, a face would appear for just a breath, watching, waiting. By the turn of the century, an antique collector bought the Langford mirror at auction. He displayed it in his shop window on Royal Street in New Orleans. Customers said it was beautiful, except on humid nights, when the glass seemed to darken from within, showing faint shapes that weren't their own. One evening, the collector found a note beneath it written in graceful, unfamiliar script. Balance keeps count. He sold the mirror the next day. In time, stories changed. Mariah became a myth, a cautionary tale told to scare children, the ghost who poisoned injustice itself. But in every version, one detail stayed: the smell of almonds drifting from kitchens where no one was cooking, and those who smelled it swore they heard a whisper follow: eat what you've sown. In 1903, a journalist researching old crimes found Miss Lyle's pamphlet in a forgotten archive. The ink had faded, but on the last page, scrawled in newer hand, was one additional line, clearly added decades later. The reflection answered back. He never published his article. Because by the time he returned home that night, his dining table was already set. 12 plates, 1 wine bottle, and in the mirror behind his chair, just for a second, someone else smiling back. The mirror remembers everything. By the summer of 1909, the Langford plantation had been abandoned for nearly 70 years. Kudzu strangled its balconies, vines split the brick, and the windows sagged like tired eyes. Locals called it the house that wouldn't stay empty. Children dared each other to run up the porch and knock on the front door, but none stayed long enough to touch it. They said you could hear silver rattling in the dining room, even though the table had rotted away decades earlier. The air around it always smelled faintly of smoke and something sweeter, like almonds. Then came the team from Baton Rouge College. Professor Edwin Harlan, a historian obsessed with antebellum folklore, brought a group of students to document the house before it collapsed. They arrived in late June with notebooks, cameras, and the same arrogance that young scholars often carry into haunted places. The house greeted them with silence. Inside, dust lay thick as snow. Every step stirred old air that smelled of vinegar, mildew, and faint perfume. In the dining hall, the professor found the remnants of the long table, its wood warped but still intact. The fireplace stood cold, the mantel scarred with soot, and above it, the mirror remained. "It shouldn't have survived," said one student, brushing away cobwebs. Professor Harlan smiled. Some artifacts refused to die. He had read about it, of course. The Langford mirror, rumored to have been made with river sand mixed with bone ash, a vanity gift from a French craftsman. It had survived fires, floods, and time. When the professor uncovered it, the room brightened. For a moment, he saw himself clearly. Then his reflection flickered. Behind his image stood another, a young woman in servant's dress, eyes downcast. "Did you see that?" one student whispered. "Dust," he said quickly. "Just dust." But dust doesn't whisper. They worked all day, cataloging artifacts, rusted cutlery, porcelain shards, broken bottles with residue. One student, Clara Ames, found a spoon engraved with the Langford crest. She pocketed it for her research, ignoring the sharp chemical scent that clung to it. That night, they made camp inside the parlor. Lanterns burned low. Rain drummed the roof. At midnight, the first sound came, soft, metallic. Clink, clink. It echoed from the dining room, where no one had set foot since dusk. Clara was the first to investigate. She carried her lantern, the spoon still in her coat pocket. The smell hit her before the light reached the room. Sweet, bitter, wrong. At the far end of the table, 12 empty chairs waited. In front of each, a goblet gleamed faintly, though none had been there before. The professor appeared behind her. "Who set these?" She turned. "I thought you did." Then one of the goblets lifted an inch off the table, slowly, deliberately, and fell back with a hollow clack. Every lamp in the house went out. Morning came gray and heavy. Rainwater pooled on the floors. They found the professor sitting by the hearth, staring into the cold ashes. His hair had turned white overnight. "She was here," he said. "The servant. She spoke." The students exchanged uneasy glances. "What did she say?" Clara asked. He looked up. "She said the house was hungry." The team left that afternoon, abandoning most of their notes. Only Clara returned to Baton Rouge with her findings and the silver spoon. Within a week, she fell ill. Doctors couldn't name the sickness. Her lips turned pale, her breath shallow. Before she died, she whispered to the nurse, "Tell them the mirror isn't finished." When her belongings were sent back to the college, the spoon was missing. Years later, caretakers who tried to renovate the Langford house refused to stay past sundown. They said the kitchen door opened by itself, that pans swung from their hooks, that sometimes they found the table set again by morning. In 1941, a young photographer named William Carter, great-grandson of Sheriff Tate, visited the site to document his family history. He had heard the stories but didn't believe them. His journal, recovered decades later, contained this entry. July 10th, 1941. "The air tonight feels thick. I took a photo of the mirror. When I developed the film, there were two faces, mine and hers. She's standing right behind me, looking into the lens. The photograph vanished from the university archives in 1947. The following year, the Langford property was purchased by a development firm hoping to build a sugar refinery. They tore down the main house, leaving only the foundation and the mirror, which workers stored in a nearby barn. 3 men quit the next day. They said they'd heard singing inside the mirror, soft, like a lullaby. When one worker smashed the glass in fear, it didn't shatter. It rippled like water, then went still. The foreman ordered it covered and left the barn locked. By autumn, the refinery plans were abandoned after a series of accidents. Machinery failures, unexplained fires. The investors called it bad luck. Locals called it something else. They called it Mariah's Table. From an oral interview recorded in 1963, Mrs. Dorothy Hines, age 83. My granddaddy told me that house never wanted peace. Said every time someone tried to use that land, they'd hear dishes clinking. Folks from town said it was the ghosts eating supper again. But Granddaddy said it wasn't ghosts. It was memory. Memories heavier than any chain. By the late 20th century, the legend evolved again. The Langford story turned into local theater, ghost tours, horror radio plays, even a 1970s film that turned Mariah into a tragic anti-hero. They showed her in rags, pouring wine that glowed red under candlelight, whispering, "Eat what you sow." Audiences loved it. Historians dismissed it. But on the set of that film, two things happened. The lead actress fainted during a take, claiming she felt someone breathing down her neck. And the prop master found his silver goblets corroded overnight, a faint almond scent in the air. The studio halted production after one of the crew collapsed mid-scene, clutching his throat. The doctor called it an allergic reaction. No one drank anything on set again. In 1989, a preservation group rediscovered the original mirror in a barn near the river. The glass was intact, though its frame had turned black. They moved it to a museum in New Orleans, labeling it Artifact Norx 1873, Langford Mirror, c. 1840s. It drew crowds instantly. Visitors claimed their reflections lagged by a heartbeat, that whispers followed them down the corridor. One guard swore he saw a woman's reflection moving even after he'd walked away. He quit the next morning. From the museum's incident report, April 5, 1991. After closing, cleaning staff discovered 12 wet footprints leading away from the exhibit hall. No leaks detected. Floor completely dry elsewhere. Security footage shows faint distortion in the camera feed between 11:18 p.m. and 11:23 p.m. The next day, the exhibit was sealed for restoration. When the curator finally reopened it 6 months later, a new inscription had appeared on the back of the frame, carved clean into the wood, though no tools were allowed near it. Still serving the living. Today, the Langford mirror sits behind glass in climate control, labeled as myth, not evidence. But every few years, a guard or visitor leaves a report of hearing faint clinking, of smelling almonds, of seeing someone's shadow beside their own. Sometimes the lights flicker, sometimes the temperature drops, and sometimes, though never on record, a visitor claims to see two figures standing behind the glass. One in a tattered black gown, one in a servant's apron, both watching. Locals still say the Langford house was never truly torn down, that it rebuilds itself in memory wherever someone sets a table out of pride or cruelty. You can see it if you're quiet. A reflection in the wine, a shimmer in the kitchen window. And if you ever hear silver clink where there's no one eating, leave. Don't look back, because the meal isn't over. It's just waiting for you to sit down. The house remembers its guests. The Langford story should have ended long ago, but stories like this, made from hunger, pride, and silence, don't die. They linger like a scent, like the faint trace of almonds in the air. By the 21st century, the plantation grounds were gone, replaced by a subdivision of pastel houses and trimmed lawns. Families moved in, unaware of what had once stood beneath their feet. They paved over the swamp, planted gardens, built swimming pools. But when the rain came heavy, the earth bled up a different color, dark, almost red. Neighbors laughed it off as iron soil. The old ones from town didn't. They said the land still knew the taste of wine. In October of 2019, a real estate agent named Caroline Moss hosted an open house on the new development's show property, Lot 12. It was a bright, modern home, freshly painted, staged with flowers and a long dining table set for guests. She planned to impress a couple from Baton Rouge. Everything went perfectly until the lights flickered. At first, she thought it was the storm. Then she noticed the temperature drop, the way her breath turned visible. The smell came next. Faint almonds, sharper than perfume. She checked the kitchen. The wine glasses were full. She didn't remember filling them. And in the mirror above the sideboard, the reflection of the table showed 12 guests already seated, though the chairs were empty. Her phone recorded 15 seconds before the screen went black. The last frame showed her standing by the mirror, eyes wide, mouth forming a word no one could read. By the time her co-workers arrived, the table was cleared. The glasses were empty. Caroline was gone. Only her shoes remained, placed neatly beside the mirror. Police dismissed it as foul play. The footage was labeled corrupted. The developer covered the incident quickly, but rumors spread. Families began reporting strange noises, cutlery clinking at night, footsteps in hallways, faint humming from the walls. One homeowner claimed she woke to find 12 plates arranged on her kitchen counter, each holding a perfect circle of salt. The houses sold slower after that. Realtors stopped hosting open dinners. A local journalist, curious about the pattern, began digging through archives. Her name was Rachel Tate, descendant of the original sheriff. She'd heard the family legend growing up, but never believed it, until she started connecting the dots. Each house built on the old Langford property matched the layout of the original plantation blueprints. Lot 12, the show home, stood exactly where the dining hall once was, and the development company's logo, a magnolia blossom, matched the embroidery found on the servant's apron from 1842. Rachel's articles went viral. Poisoned land, the plantation that won't stay buried. Comments flooded in, stories of dinners gone wrong, of strange reflections in polished surfaces, of voices calling from kitchen sinks. Then she received a package. No return address. Inside was a silver spoon, tarnished but unmistakable, the Langford crest faint beneath the corrosion. Attached was a note written in looping, old-fashioned script. Every hunger leaves a mark. Every meal remembers. Rachel kept the spoon on her desk as a curiosity, but within a week, her apartment began to smell faintly of almonds. She thought it was the neighbors cooking. Then her cat refused to enter the kitchen. She started hearing glass clinking from the cupboard at odd hours. And one night, when she opened the fridge, the light flickered. And for a heartbeat, the reflection in the door wasn't hers. The next day, she donated the spoon to the museum that still kept the Langford mirror. The curator accepted it reluctantly. "Some things don't like being separated," he said. Rachel laughed nervously. "It's just a story." But as she left, she swore the mirror rippled slightly, like water disturbed by breath. 3 days later, the museum alarm tripped at midnight. Security found nothing missing, but the cameras recorded a faint haze moving through the gallery. 12 wet footprints appeared on the marble floor, leading from the mirror to the exit and stopping just short of the front door. The next morning, the curator found the Langford mirror clean for the first time in decades. Its surface gleamed, flawless, reflecting the hall perfectly, until he stepped closer. Then, faintly, He saw the dining hall again, the table, the goblets, and at the head of the table sat two women, one in a black gown with eyes like frost, the other in servant's white, smiling faintly. They both turned their heads toward him. He fainted before he hit the floor. The footage leaked online within days. Forums buzzed with theories: ghost, hoax, revenge. Historians tried to explain it away. Chemical reflections, camera artifacts. But the video showed something more chilling. When slowed down, one could read the lips of the servant in white. She was saying, "It's your turn." The museum closed indefinitely after that. The mirror was crated and moved to an undisclosed facility. Workers who handled it complained of headaches, blurred vision, and a metallic taste in their mouths. One quit mid-shift, claiming he saw people moving inside the glass. The crate was sealed and shipped to storage in Baton Rouge. No label, no record. But a week later, the facility reported a break-in. No items were stolen, except one mirror. The night guard swore he saw a barefoot woman carrying it through the hallway. When police arrived, the only evidence left was a puddle of river water and a faint smell of almonds. That same month, a traveling exhibition titled Echoes of the Old South opened in Chicago. Among the items listed was an unnamed antebellum mirror, provenance unknown. Visitors reported strange experiences. Reflections lagged. Some swore they saw faces that weren't their own. One woman fainted after seeing a full dining table in the glass, complete with steaming dishes. By the time the exhibit closed, 12 attendees had reported identical dreams, sitting at a long wooden table unable to move, while a quiet woman poured wine that smelled faintly of almonds. A decade later, the Langford mirror vanished again. No insurance record, no theft report. Just gone. The curator who'd last handled it left a single email draft on his computer, unsent, time-stamped at 10:28 p.m. on July 17, 2029. If you find this, don't touch the glass. It remembers. Today, people say it still travels, appearing in antique stores, hotel lobbies, old restaurants. Always for a short while. Always near a dinner gone wrong. They say if you stare too long into any mirror that's too old, you might see a flash of candlelight, a shimmer of wine, or a reflection that raises its glass before you do. No one has ever proven the story, but sometimes on humid southern nights, restaurant workers swear they hear cutlery clinking from empty rooms, faint laughter echoing down closed hallways, a table being set, a meal about to begin. From the recovered notebook of Rachel Tate, found near the River Levy, June 3, 2031. I followed the trail. The mirror moves with whoever believes in it next. Maybe belief itself is the poison. I can smell almonds again. I think I've been invited to dinner. Witnesses later reported seeing her near the old plantation site just before dawn, barefoot, carrying something wrapped in linen. She hasn't been seen since. The next day, a hiker found a broken frame by the riverbank, its wood carved with 6 words: still serving, still remembering, still waiting. Legends endure because they feed on the living. The Langford story is no longer just about a jealous mistress or a servant's revenge. It's about what happens when cruelty leaves a mark too deep for time to swallow. Some say the mirror feeds on guilt, reflecting back the faces that made it. Others believe it's something older, an echo of justice that refuses to fade. But whether you believe or not, one truth remains. Every story that's told becomes another mirror. And some mirrors, once looked into, look back forever. Even now, Travelers along the Mississippi say that on still nights, if you walk the river road near St. Francisville and look down into the black water, you'll see a shimmer, not of your own face, but of a grand dining hall lit by candlelight. And in the reflection, two women wait patiently at the head of the table, pouring crimson wine into 12 perfect glasses. If you ever see that sight, don't linger. Don't raise your hand in greeting. Because if you do, the reflection will smile and raise its glass to you. And somewhere, deep in the current, something will whisper back, "The supper isn't over." The legend says it never will be, because hunger has memory, and memory always eats last. We're only scratching the surface. The next case is even darker. Subscribe before it drops. The mirror is still waiting.